Okay, welcome everyone to this very interesting panel discussion about 6 months into this pandemic. Wow, who would have thought 2020 would be like this? And it's been quite incredible how much we actually have learnt about each other, about working, about our organisations, about this move to potentially what a new normal will look like. So we've got a series of great panelists, but firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, which for both speakers and participants, we've got a few people participating from across Australia. And it's obviously an online webinar, but we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and we would like to pay our respects to elders past, present and future. I'm Mark Woodrow, I'm from Engage Squared. We are a Microsoft consultancy, and we have great partners in Canberra, Synergy Group. So Regita Norton is also joining us today. We call her Bree. We also have Manisha from the Centre for Interactive Design, and from Microsoft, Troy Wallace. And firstly, I'd like to introduce Kat, who is from the New South Wales Public Service Commission. She's done incredible work on flexible work for the New South Wales government, and I know that she's had some of the webinars that she's actually held around flexible work in this time of the pandemic have had 1,000 people from the public service in New South Wales join. So she certainly is an expert on the topic, and I'd love to hear more, Kat, about how you think things have gone for the pandemic and suggestions you have.
Thanks, Mark. Yep, that's right. We've been working with the New South Wales government sector for about 3 years now. Back in 2016, Mike Baird decided that he wanted to make all roles in the sector flex. So starting around 2018, we started to build a whole heap of resources to help the sector to make that switch, both frontline and office-based roles. And we were actually meant to finish up on 30 June this year, but we got extended because of the pandemic and because the sector was saying to us back in March that they really needed us to stay on and just provide that support. So since then, we have written a bunch of resources that are COVID specific, and we've also run a heap of workshops across multiple agencies within the government sector. And what we've learnt through that, and the workshops are really about how to prepare for a return to a new normal. And part of the workshops was really finding out what's happened and what have people learnt during COVID. And what we discovered is that what people really want from work these days is changing. It has changed. It was changing before COVID. People really do want work-life balance. I think our values are changing as a society, and you know, kind of what we want out of life is changing, and it's broadening. At the same time, people want to be able to pursue their careers. They want those opportunities, but they do want to work from home at the same time. Maybe not 5 days a week, and certainly 5 days a week working from home at this time hasn't really been true flexibility. It's been forced on us. But a lot of people are wanting to move out of Sydney. They're wanting to pursue or other centres, other cities. They want to pursue that quieter life, maybe work from regional areas, but have those same really satisfying and well-paid jobs. People want an easier experience accessing work. They don't want to be getting on crowded trains and crowded buses or sitting in traffic 5 days a week. We've heard stories of people who are going through a return to work program because of injuries, rehab, where they're actually being able to participate in work more quickly through this time as a result of the flexibility. People with disability who either physically find it hard to get to work or maybe emotionally find it hard to get to work because of their disability. So many of us are time poor, you know, and actually the workplace isn't always a happy space for everyone. So, you know, I think flexible working has given, and this time during COVID has really opened our eyes to, I guess, the options that are available to us. And another thing that we've seen is that sick leave costs are down. So when you offer people flexible working, actually they don't need to take their sick leave to be able to then just access or experience that work-life balance. So we've come so far, really, and in the past, the common approach to flexibility was often rules or policy driven. It was quite ad hoc. Sometimes flexible working came with a stigma attached to it. And really the focus was on the type of flexibility that people were using. But right now we've got this opportunity before things return to normal. You know, an expanded view of flexible working sees the opportunity of starting instead with how the work is done. And we can plan and arrange that work differently. So for frontline roles, what other roster options might be feasible? Can the jobs themselves be reconfigured? In all sectors, this does seem to be happening, this expanded view. So what are the opportunities? Well, I'd say, and I'm hoping that we're moving towards flex as a way of thinking. It's a true, if not, why not? It's less about types of flex work or roles, but it's actually about accepting the need for adaptability and agility in the way we work and being prepared to be flexible even about our flexibility. So while all of this sounds wonderful, making it work in practice is another matter, and doing that in an operationally safe way. So what I want to talk about quickly is what I see as 5 key enablers of flexible working. We need to really enhance the opportunities for change, firstly, and I worked on some change playbooks 18 months ago, which were really about how organisations can introduce change across 5 key areas. The tech and systems. So, you know, obviously we need technology, we need systems that are accessible from anywhere, but also within our workforce management practices. So from attracting employees, retaining employees, onboarding employees remotely, you know, performance, business planning, retention, and even through to pre-retirement, we can actually use flexibility to be able to truly embed this way of working through the whole employee life cycle. You know, even with performance, we could also include our KPIs around flexible working skills like collaboration. Otherwise, there's no accountability for change. Performance plans should also include a discussion of how a flexible working arrangement is assisting the employee to bring their best to work. If it's not, that's a good time to actually tweak the arrangement and get to the bottom of why that is. So we're really encouraging people to have those conversations up front when it's not working. What are those skills and experience that people need to be able to either manage a flexible working team or to work flexibly? And we actually did a whole heap of work on identifying those skills. And in January this year, I released a guide called Managing a Disperse Team. It was pretty crazy timing, really. You know, how can we communicate? How can our meetings change? How do we collaborate within teams and even with other teams? So we need to use the technology really well to do this and to develop those new skills and habits. How do we maintain the connection and the cohesion within our team? How do we do that with our clients? You know, really so that we can maintain productivity. And a lot of that is also how we communicate with the workforce, how we improve awareness of what it does mean to work flexibly and to have that mindset. And so really, when we do all these things, we can see the culture of the organisation change to one that is a culture of flexibility and not just policies and sort of things that are imposed on people, because that's not really flexibility. In terms of job and work design, we need to be open-minded and flexible in our thinking about how work's currently done and who does what. Can jobs and work be designed differently? Can our job deliverables and our business outcomes be achieved in different ways? Can those client or patient expectations be negotiated differently or even our service improved? I would say they can, but we need to start by challenging those assumptions about the ideal worker and ideal work. And part of the way that we've fostered that change within the sector is by helping organisations to adopt a positive or promoting mindset. So that's about being active and innovative in seeking flexibility that maintains or improves performance and well-being for not only individuals, but for teams, for customers, and for the organisation. What we've seen through our pilots is that we've seen an increase in job effectiveness, collaboration, by sharing job components. And we've seen innovation really by increasing the diversity of perspectives in a team. We need to look for ways to increase flexibility, not for ways to block flexibility. And that really does change that mindset from a manager who needs to have people present in front of them to one where managers are more familiar with a dispersed team and just trusting people to get on with the job. It's really about asking why not. So the team-based approach that we have piloted across the sector really shifted people from taking an individual approach to flexibility, where the conversations began with an individual's request or looking at the business case for it, and maybe seeking to accommodate the request while ensuring that the flexibility didn't have a negative impact, to a team-based approach, which is really experimental in nature. It begins by identifying the outcomes that need to be maintained or improved, regardless of flexibility. It challenges assumptions about jobs, about work, and what's the best way to achieve outcomes. And it really puts those problems in the hands of the team that know the work the best because they're doing the work to actually work together and solve for that. And so, you know, really what we've seen through those pilots is that we've been able to develop and enact a team-based flexibility culture. Now, I've got some slides there, a slide there that's just about this survey that we did with those 31 pilots. And keep in mind that this is stats for those who strongly held to the belief that they could easily set up a flexible working arrangement using current processes. So before a pilot, it went from 33 to 50% of those who strongly believe. My job allows the flexibility I need to meet my work and family commitments, from 26 to 52. I can access flexibility for any reason, from 12 to 37. So this isn't just those who agree, this is those who strongly agree. Our team works together effectively. Don't we all want that as managers? From 37 to 49. Flexibility in where employees do their work, 29 to 51. And keep in mind, some of those pilots were frontline. So obviously the option around where we work when we're in a frontline role is limited. Our team has an effective system for organising and planning work to enable flexibility, 17% to 38%. And lastly, our team is flexible and prepared to adjust how or when work is done in order to get a job done, 27 to 48%. So yeah, huge benefits in the team-based approach. And we developed a toolkit you know, to help the sector, but anyone really take that approach. So I encourage you to have a look at that. But really, the team-based approach is not an investment just in flexible working. It also helps the team develop their skills, their ability for curiosity and flexible thinking. It improves staff well-being, it diversifies the experiences and performance of the team. It really promotes those effective team working relationships and the relationships with supervisors. So really, it's about workplace innovation. It is how you can craft new ways of working, which is pretty exciting.
Thanks.
And then, yeah, lastly, I've got so much more I could say, but I will hand back over to Mark because there's so much we want to share with you this morning. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Kat. And I love the have flex in your flexibility. There you go. There's a new expression. You all got that. So if you've got a flexible work program, make sure you're flexible about your flexible work program. And I do think the pandemic has been a huge pilot in remote work for everyone. So I think there's some interesting things going to come out of that. I'll hand over now to Manisha from the Centre for Inclusive Design. Very interested to see how inclusivity, diversity is being taken account of as we've sort of been forced to work remotely. So Manisha, would you like to introduce yourself and welcome.
Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you, Kat. That was fascinating. It's really interesting. I know we've talked about this before as we've put the presentation together, but just listening to that again in terms of how we think about flexibility in so many different ways is fabulous. So thank you for having me here today. As Mark said, my name's Manisha and I'm from the Centre for Inclusive Design. And as the name suggests, what we tend to do is look at inclusion and inclusion practices and how they impact on the way we work and how we can get the best of all of us when we work and play and when we're in community, obviously, as well. So as most of us know, I mean, you know, I've written this sentence down, but I was thinking about this. It says workplaces in Australia have been dramatically different now and have been for almost 6 months. And that's like a duh moment, right? Like, of course they're different. But when we think about that, I think it's not just that they're different now to when we started in lockdown, especially if you're in like anywhere not Melbourne or not Victoria where you're still in lockdown. But these 6 months have been really interesting. And the conversation, I think, the beginning we were talking about what the new normal would look like after COVID. I think the conversation's now moved to say, what is this new normal? Because, you know, this COVID environment isn't and hasn't been a 2-week phenomenon or a 1-month phenomenon. We're now hitting the 6-month mark and it looks like we'll be in this world for quite a long time. So sometimes I think it's really easy to go, what will it look like next? But actually, what does it look like now is also something interesting to look at. And we see this a lot. So the centre works with organisations and also speaks to industry leaders on practical ways inclusion and access have provided, I guess, a spotlight on some of the challenges that people have, as well as some of the insights and solutions to some of the issues that we're facing at the moment. So when we think about inclusion, and sometimes, you know, people talk about universal design as well, what does that really mean? So for most people, when they think of inclusive design, people think about designing for people who are missing out. And those people are often seen as people with a disability or a disadvantage. So they're the people who are on the edges, and it's you know, a good thing to help them. However, I think, and in this new environment, that's interesting in and of itself, because we're all experiencing that disability, if you like, a mismatch between the system and ourselves in different ways. And we're all having to experience what it's like when the world doesn't work for us. And really, I think where we come into this is that we also think about inclusion in a different way and inclusive design in a different way. And that is to think about how that problem space actually allows us to create solutions for all of us. So there are some numbers around this that might help to explain what I mean by this. And if you look at the graph or the page that we have up now, those little dots, if you think about them as a scattergram of either the population or your workforce or your customers. So if each of those little dots was a different person and we changed the word difficulty or, sorry, disability or vulnerable communities or, you know, someone who doesn't quite fit into difficulty, and think about what we do from the perspective of, does the design work for someone or doesn't it work? Do they have a difficulty? And if you look at the dots in the middle are really close to each other. So not only do they look like there are a lot of them, it looks like they're very close to each other. So people who design works for, they often look like the majority because their views are very similar to each other. And they're all clustered together. So a good example of something that is a majority design that would work for that small cluster back in the pre-COVID world would be a meeting around a boardroom table. You know, where for the most part it works for most people. As we move out, you can see that the dots not only become further away from each other from the centre, but they become further away from each other. Okay, so then when we look right on the edge, if we take that boardroom table option again. If you're someone who doesn't like speaking up, or you're somebody who can't hear, you know, that design starts to not work for you. The interesting thing is, though, that often we look at the center, we're focused on the center, we're not focused on the edges. And Microsoft did some work back in 2003, so quite a long time ago, just looking at computer technology and asking people whether design worked for them or not. And again, this work is actually, it's like an optical illusion, this chart, because of course you can see the numbers there. That group in the middle, 21%. Okay, so if you think about the people who struggle with that design or standard designs, we're looking at, you know, almost 80%. And out of the 25% that design doesn't work for, about 18% of those people would have a visible or invisible disability. So if we design for those edges on the edge of that circle, our design actually captures more people. And the insights that we get from those people can actually help us build systems that are more robust and more flexible. So a good example of that, for instance, in our own office is we have, you know, a reasonably small office, but we have 10 staff, and we had offices we had offices in Sydney and around the country, and standard working hours before COVID. But we also had flexible work practices. We had remote workers, some of whom worked in communities where bandwidth wasn't great. We also have staff who are legally blind, and we have staff who are deaf. So when we actually tried to organise meetings around that boardroom table, we took all of this into account. And what it meant is that we designed systems that were robust and met individuals' needs. And what that really meant was that when we did our first test of moving home just before lockdown happened, we didn't have to change one of our systems. Nothing had to, and that was a surprise to us. But in fact, we'd already built systems that would work if somebody couldn't leave their room. So the system was robust enough for the change. And I'm not saying that this to showcase our organisation or to say that we certainly didn't have other challenges, but it is the value of designing for difference. And those systems were made for all of us. So when we design from the edge, it actually includes the middle. And if nothing else, COVID has taught us that we can't be complacent about the people who are often left behind. You know, and those decisions that we're making about the people who are left behind seem far closer to home now when we're talking about ageing communities or other communities. So I won't go through all of the differences and the things that we've learned, but I do have some thought starters here from some of the work we've done and some of the experiences we've had. And these are thought starters that might help people within their own organisations. So the first one, and when you think about these, think about the edge, think about those people on the edge, and we'd love to hear from you while we go through our Q&A about how these things work for you. We talk about barnacle moments. So barnacles are things that stick to the sides of boats, but they're also, in our world, the things that stick in our minds. So either things where you go, that's great what Manisha's saying, that's a light bulb moment, or actually I completely disagree. And I don't agree with that at all, because they're edge thoughts and edge conversations are always a really great place to start from. So the first one is, what does collaboration mean? You know, we tend to privilege in pre-COVID world, we privilege people who speak really well and who are articulate and who are able to speak up and who are extroverts. You know, when we think about leadership skills, often they're the things we're talking about. Now, the difference between introverts and extroverts has been equalised in a slightly different way. So what does collaboration mean? Who is this new world working for and who isn't it working for? And what does a blended environment look like? We know that people are working approximately 15% harder now than they were before, which is great from an efficiency perspective, but at what cost? Okay. How many people are suffering from cognitive fatigue and overload? How many people are moving through an adrenaline kind of, like we've been working in kind of firefighter mode. What happens when this continues? How do we do this in a way that works, that we get the efficiencies without losing people? We've heard that women are now more likely, in surveys that have been done in a number of businesses, women are more likely to want to work from home than men. So why is that? And what does that actually tell us about our workforces? And the next mental health crisis facing us, and this information came out of actually the health department in the UK, where they're saying the biggest mental health crisis is actually PTSD. As people struggle with COVID. We've also had bushfires in Australia. So when you look at your mental health plans in businesses, and when we talk to organisations, most of their mental health plans look at things like anxiety and depression. How many of them actually look at PTSD? And what can we learn from communities that have had persistent issues with PTSD, and how can we swipe some of those insights? And what happens when a workplace isn't a safe space? So as we become more flexible about our spaces, we know that in Australia, 1 in 4 people have experienced domestic violence. It's a huge number. It also means that 1 in 4 people have committed violence. So what happens when the workplace is no longer a safe space? How are organisations dealing with that? And we've seen some really interesting and very innovative ways that people are working to keep their staff safe, especially when they're working from home or not. And we're seeing a rising unemployment rate. And as that happens, who do we preference for jobs? So, you know, there's been a lot of conversation about the glass ceiling and the type of people who've normally gotten jobs easier than others. As more and more people are unemployed and the people who are on interview panels change, what does that actually mean? And who are we going to interview? Are we going to interview the cis white male who's got 10 years experience in a particular role, or are we going to interview or take on the person with disability who has great lived experience but might not be as easy a fit? So how are we going to be intentional about these decisions when there are more people in the workforce? So humans are incredibly nimble, and we're seeing that now, but there's a cost and a benefit to this. And these questions can be the difference between success or failure in the new world.
Very good, Manisha, and I'm sort of, it's made me think, because we did design a lot of intranets and digital workplaces, how this sort of thought of design for difference is obviously really important in what we do, and also if you look at accommodating things at the edge, then you bring everything, you know, in the center comes with it, which is a really, I think, some really interesting insights. Thanks for that, and I would like to now switch over to Bree, who's with Synergy Group, our partner with this webinar. Thank you, Synergy Group, for doing this with us. And I'm interested, Bree, you've got lots of obviously big government clients, especially in Canberra. What are you hearing from government organisations? What's your client base telling you about the learnings of the last 6 months?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Kat and Manisha. Such amazing insights from you guys. And we're seeing. I started with Synergy in March, just as COVID hit, and I'd already joined what I thought was going to be a new organisation that has a pretty positive and social culture. And that had to adjust really quickly. And what I noticed and really quite respected was the leadership in Synergy and how they supported and guided their staff, not just for Synergy itself, but to help support their clients here in Canberra. We know, as Craig has put in the chat, thank you, Craig, you've picked one of my notes, is that government are very slow to make some change. And that in this case, there was a sort of resistance, and I heard things like you know, we've put up these new working environments, and people are, you know, it's going to be new ways of working, and I don't know how it's going to be used, and you know, we don't know what that means. Well, they soon found out, and they had to adjust really quickly, and we've had to adjust with them and help them and support them. We do a lot of user research online, so we've had to actually be able to find ways to adapt and be flexible around that user research. We've had to do some research with some vulnerable people, so we've had to think of some ways to manage that aspect, where usually you would have a time and space in person with some of these people. So yeah, we've come up with some ways to work with our clients that they've really appreciated. And not only that, Synergy itself has been very supportive of the tools and being very quick to adapt when you do need to get something done or work with something differently, especially with the clients. One of the other things that I've noticed is some of the thinking of how to be more inclusive in how we do this. Manisha touched on this as well. You know, talking in the accessibility community, you know, there's a lot of people out there that have been wanting to work remotely for a long time, and we've told, you know, you need to come to the office or whatever. Now there's these opportunities for them to actually do work remotely, and I think we should be considering more diverse workforce in that thinking and in this new normal. So from our side, we're also seeing some changes, not just with the resistance, but the in government, but also, you know, how long did it take for us to get telehealth working? You know, where you can actually talk to your doctor online. That's been wanted for quite a while, and that's been, you know, forced in a little bit of a in this environment. And I think some of the other things, we've seen some positive things, and as Manisha put down, there's some negative aspects as well around thinking about how to make your staff safe. But some of the other things are really around that cultural aspect of, you know, the social interaction. People do go to work to be social. How are people managing that? Because that's, you know, the team aspects, you do it online, but are you still doing some kind of social interaction, allowing people to be inclusive around that? And what are some of the tricks in that space? That's one of the things that have come up with our clients as well. You know, they make their homes, their workplace personalised. So, you know, there's a way to get close to people and really build those networks, and that's difficult to do when you're doing working remotely. And there's also, Manisha touched on this about the introverts and extroverts, and the strengths now of maybe being flexible to suit both. So you know, understanding the differences in personalities in online meetings means that maybe you do need to meet face to face if you can, and you're not in lockdown. So. And that's what we're seeing. Synergy itself is doing a range of other webinars about how we think our workforce is changing, and we'll be sharing some links in that in the chat at the end. And I'm going to now pass on to Troy Waller, who we had as a wonderful speaker for AussieWay in February around Microsoft's education space. And he's doing some great work with bringing in these new tools into the classrooms and to how kids and teachers are using it. So I'd like to introduce Troy Waller. He's the Learning and Delivery Specialist, and he's the Accessibility Lead at Microsoft. And he's got some amazing things to share.
Wonderful, thanks. I really appreciate that, Bree. You made me sound better than I am. I would really like to just make you aware that I am coming from Melbourne, so I am sharing this space with a wife, 2 children and a dog. So I just want to apologise for they're teenagers, my kids, so I want to apologise for any noise up front. Anyway, this is what's been going on behind the scenes for me. So having a look at what I do, I work with schools. I work with at a systemic level, but also down to a school level, even to a teacher level, which is great. And my role as the accessibility lead means that I get to work with schools not just around, you know, sort of the mainstream application of technology and curriculum, but also looking at those kids that are on the fringes, and what we just saw there that Manisha was sharing, right? The people that are in those, you know, different parts of those concentric circles. I love the Microsoft mission statement because it really brings back what I do. Our mission is to empower every person, every organisation on the planet to achieve more. I usually underline every person because there is a real focus at Microsoft to making sure that accessibility and inclusivity is a big part of what we do. So next slide, if you could, looking at Education Reimagined. So this is a document that was put together by Microsoft and New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. So Michael Fullan was one of the authors of this, and he's a bit of a name in the education space. And what they did was they looked at these 3 stages. There's sort of the disruption, then moving on to remote learning, and then coming back to what we're now calling hybrid learning, which is the idea of taking what we've learned from that remote time and bringing it into the classroom. But what was really important about this was there was a real focus, as we see there, on health, safety, well-being, equity and quality of learning. So I'll make sure that I put that the download link for that that paper in there for you in a moment. But we've moved to the disruption phase, right? So this was basically when COVID really hit. And what was going on for a lot of schools, if you can see there down on the systems, we were looking at things like the continuity of academic learning, supporting students in terms of independent skills and learning, continuity with assessment and support to parents. There was a real scramble and there was so much that was going on at a system level. But again, what came up was the idea of well-being, making sure that teachers and students are in a good place and able to learn, let alone adapting to technology, etc. But from the disruption phase, we went to remote learning, and then from there, in some states, obviously people are back at school already, and then there's this whole sort of cluster idea where schools are in and out of those 3 different phases. So here's what we've learned. Here's some of our findings. So most importantly in there, you can see it in the red font, students who struggled most during this time were the most vulnerable. Migrant students and those with special needs as well. So it was really important for us at Microsoft, as we also scrambled to support our customers and support schools and support education systems, that there was a big part of our messaging is here's the features, here's the tools, here's the things that you can use to support those teachers and students that need that little bit of extra help. And there were other findings as well, but you can see that well-being, self-regulation, etc. was there. But we also found that there were students who thrived. So some students found themselves, as we see at the end there, with more choice and more voice, and they were able to learn synchronously and asynchronously. Kids were finishing all their work by lunchtime because they didn't have to move between classes. They didn't have to slow down for other kids in the class. So there's a spectrum where kids were actually struggling and other kids were doing really, really well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to really take you quickly through some of our new features and bits and pieces, because again, as I said, Microsoft, we scrambled to get things rolled out. So things that would have taken months, features and tools, were actually coming really quite quickly. So next slide. So with the Teams captioning, and I think someone will just need to click on that slide just to get that to start playing. So what we've done is we've built captioning into Teams, and so we'll go back a slide. So what's happening now is you've got the ability to turn on, if you're in school, you've got the ability to turn on captioning, and that's done at an individual level. And for you today in the Teams live event, you would have hopefully had the option to turn that on yourself. So that's not a universal thing. It's not like we turn it on and everybody gets it, because for some people captioning can be distracting. The other thing we've done is the background blur, which you see there. You can throw in images like the one you can see behind me, or you can throw in blur, because for some people having those distractions of things moving in the background, etc., can be quite, as I said, distracting and off-putting to people. So having that option was really, really key. Next slide. The other thing we look at is the ability to pin. Now, this is really important when we're looking at things like deafness and needing to have Auslan interpreters, etc. So what you can see on the slide here, and this is again done at an individual level. So what I'm seeing in Teams and what someone else is seeing in Teams can be very, very different. So inside Teams now, we've got the ability to pin people and multiple people. So there may be people, as I said, there's someone there that's actually signing, but we still want to be able to see the content. We still want to see the people that are speaking, etc. So being able to pin a person and pin multiple people is really quite key. Thanks. Next slide. The next one's talking about, and this is really good for teaching and for classrooms, is what's called spotlight mode. So just making sure that kids aren't necessarily pinning things and distracting things. I, as a teacher, can control what my students are going to see. So this spotlight mode, which is brand new, means that the teacher can make sure that what's going on the kid's screen is exactly what he or she wants them to see. The next one is what's called together mode. This is a lot of fun, but there's actually some science behind it. The idea of having, up to, 49 people on the screen at once and following each of those can lead to a degree of fatigue. So putting everybody together in what's called together mode means that, and I find this all the time when I'm presenting to large groups, I can actually look at the entire crowd that I'm speaking to and I can get reactions from them, right? So I'm getting whole groups and I'm not having to jump back and forwards between people and pin, etc. And what was just announced this morning is that we're going to have different together backgrounds. So you can have people sitting at desks, you can have people sitting in auditoriums, all kinds of stuff. So keep an eye out for that. But it's not just a fun thing, it's actually good for fatigue in terms of your meetings. The next one is the raise hand mode. So raise hand mode is a great thing, and we see this in other platforms as well. But what we've done is we've made it so that when someone raises their hand, they will actually get this gold banner which passes around them. You can also have audio announcements, etc. So just ways to make sure that the presenter is aware that people have got their hands raised. There's also the ability to look at the participants mode, and then you'll get a list of people and you'll get them in order of who's raised their hand first, etc. Next one is insights mode. Now insights, I should say insights feature, part of Teams. When you're in a school environment, especially in a remote or even a hybrid, meaning that, a combination of remote and face-to-face, being able to know what the students are doing and how they are connecting with the teachers and how they are connecting with the content is really important. And obviously a lot of that is lost in a remote environment. So what the Insights tab does inside Teams is it actually measures activity. It measures the student activity and their degree of engagement. It even gives stats on the whole class or individual levels of communication. Have they started their assignments? What are their average grades, etc. And this can be, in terms of privacy, this can be switched off from at a school level or at a system department level as well. And this data belongs to the school or to the system. It's not something that Microsoft will access either. So I just wanted to share some of those cool features that have come into Teams and give you a little bit of an idea of where we're at with schools and what we're doing. There's still a lot of scrambling. There's still a lot of running around from a Microsoft perspective and from a school perspective, but it's really good to see that there's been a really fast mobilisation, both from us and also from the schools. So thanks very much. I'll hand back now. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Troy. That was some really interesting updates, and obviously Ignite's on at the moment, but I didn't know that the together mode, which we use quite a lot, is going to have different applications in terms of looking at desks and different layouts. I think that'll be it's a really cool thing to do in terms of those semi-social engagements when you've got a wider team. So I think that's really great. Now I do want to let everyone know that you can ask some questions in the chat. We do have a couple. I think we've answered, but Craig's raised one, and I think it's quite interesting to say, well, why do we assume that pre-COVID we were just normal? Because we've been doing some form of knowledge work or working from home since the 1990s. Of those that were around, is really the internet has really enabled us to work from anywhere. So I'll put it out to our panel. Do you think there's an opportunity now to sort of adjust the way we do things, rethink the concept of work and the tools that we're actually using from any location? I wonder if we go back to Kat, whether you've got some thoughts on whether this is now an opportunity to sort of do things in a better way, taking up some of those flexible work things that we potentially have been able to do for decades.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. And I feel like I did address, maybe Craig's question came just, before the end of my presentation, because I do feel like I did address the topic of how we can take a more innovative way forward. Our solution is through a team-based approach where you foster that culture of flexible thinking, that culture of innovation, in the way that you put to your team a shared responsibility for coming up with problem solving. So, it's really that outcomes-led approach. What is a team responsible to deliver, and is there different ways that can be done? And so that's really why diversity is so important, because we do want people who think differently and see the world differently to be part of that solution within our team. And we do want to promote that culture which is fail fast, so we can learn from the failures so that we can actually forge new ways of doing things. And I do think that working remotely and changing our whole landscape for where we work, when we work, what we do when we work, how and who does the work, will actually forge that new way of thinking and new way of acting. And I guess one of our catchphrases has been that you can, you act your way into a new way of thinking. You don't think your way into a new way of acting. So we've really tried to foster the team-based approach to help teams to give it a go, pilot a different way. And if after 3 months it's not really working out, then try something different. But especially Craig's raised the issue of, government being the least flexible employer. I feel like that our work has really encouraged at least the New South Wales government sector, to take the challenge of working flexibly and benefit from the results of that, both, for the business and for individuals, and the experience of being in a team. So I do think over time we will see, huge changes to the way that the culture of work is experienced and what comes out of that as a result.
Yeah, good points. I go back to Manisha. I wonder if I think a lot of organisations are starting to look at how they sort of design some sort of hybrid for going back to offices. Have you got some tips or seen some things that you've learned over the last few months that would be really useful if people are actually working out a new design for difference, if you like, in that sort of work plan of sort of getting back to this sort of hybrid mode?
Yes, absolutely. And I know there's a question again from Craig around the concentric circles in inclusive design. I think these two things might sit together. One is that picture is actually about the different people rather than actually just the design, though they do link together. And I think we have to accept that inclusion is a journey, right? So even when we look at hybrid solutions, there are always situations where not everything will work for everyone. But when Troy spoke about the way teams are working, when we think about inclusive design, it's actually finding different solutions for different groups of people. So if we look at a smartphone, for instance, a smartphone, we all use one, but we all use it differently. And the way we use it differently is because, for people who like gesture control, that's come from technology that's related to carpal tunnel. If it wasn't for VoiceOver, we wouldn't have Siri. So when we start to look at blended workplaces and the ones that are working, it seems to me that it's not because people say, well, this is the solution for blended workplaces. It's actually going back to those teams and looking at what works for those teams. And so, for instance, in our organisation, we didn't use Teams as software a lot. before we tended to use kind of Slack conversations, we're finding that Teams has a lot of different resources that different people in our organisation seem to work with quite well. And even when we go to physical meetings and physical spaces, often for those of you who are as old as me, we tend to have a max headroom in the office or the equivalent that comes on online, and we find that that's better than actually having everyone sitting in front of a screen. However, different organisations are different, so we tend to go, who isn't this working for, and what's the and that we can bring in to make this work? And if this doesn't really work, what is an alternative way or a collaborative pathway that we can take so that people can be included in different ways? So some people say to me, we'd rather have the information first, we need an agenda, whereas other people go, no, actually, I want to just be in the moment. Well, we create both. And it seems like a lot more work to start with, but what we find is that once we start working that way, the systems are easier at the other end.
Nice. Troy, I think I'd also be interested in what you think in terms of us going back to this sort of blended environment and what you've learned from obviously extensive work in the education sector, etc. Yeah,
sure. Well, resonating really strongly with what Manisha was saying, it's certainly not an instead unless it needs to be. It's an and. And this was my messaging when working with teachers prior to COVID, is that not every feature is going to be for everyone. And we talk about universal design, but universal design for learning. And we have to make sure that we balance the support as well as the challenge. Too much support, children don't grow. Too much challenge, children don't grow, right, in terms of their learning. So it's about what do you turn on and what do you turn off. And that's when I was talking about some of these features are not controlled at a universal level or at an admin level or even a presenter level in a Teams call or in some other application. It's actually at an individual level. So it's about that individual turning on what they need and turning off what they don't need. So when things become, for example, word prediction to me is completely annoying if I've got word prediction every time I'm typing. But for someone else, it's an absolute game changer. So having the ability to individually turn those on and individually turn those off, I think is quite key. But striking that balance with and this is true about adults as much as kids, and also educating people into how to do that. Right, things as simple as how to control your notifications in something like Teams or Outlook so that you're not bombarded with white noise can be a game changer. But then for someone who needs distraction reduction, it's actually a necessity. So yeah, I just want to resonate with that I think it's really important at that individual level.
And in terms of individual level, is breakout rooms coming for Teams in the those that use other tools with breakout
definitely rooms? It's already in preview, so some of us have got it, it's coming to general release at some time really soon. I saw there was more announcements today around breakout rooms and features being added, etc. So it's definitely it's a very short time away.
Great. Good question also from Janine, asking we've obviously had through COVID an ability to trial people working from home or people working on shorter weeks, etc. I think this is a really good part of the question, which is there a way we can continue to encourage leaders to support and enhance a new working environment? Bree, I don't know if you might want to talk about how leadership works with this, and maybe Kat, you've got some views as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. I'll put a link in the chat. There's some other work going on here at Synergy around that, and it's also talking about outcome-based. Allowing, and it came down to that one of the positive things that people are more productive, and if you give them the trust, they will get that work done. So and managers do not need to manage and overcook everything anymore. So as long as they've got that trust, and I think there's an aspect of that comes to outcome based. So working with your team to say what can you complete in this time this week? What's something that we're actually working on that you can get done? And if you happen to get that done in your 4 days, what's to say that you shouldn't be able to have that 4-day week? And I think there's an aspect of that that needs that trust to grow and that respect, and I think that's coming because of the environment we have at the moment, and that usually that has been quite hard to change. I just also wanted to touch on the tools that Troy mentioned around, giving people need time to work out how things work. We found the same thing in doing our user research and usability sessions, and also when we're doing our online workshops. We tend to set some time for people to play with the tool. So play and explore with it. We're usually there to facilitate as they ask questions. We're not actually running a session, and we've found that's been quite useful as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to mention?
Absolutely.
Leadership?
So I would answer that question in two ways. Firstly, from an organizational level. So I wrote a resource which is about building that leadership buy-in. So, making the change towards flexible working, but linking the data that we have and case studies from across private and public sectors around how organizations have made that shift towards flexible working and what the data has said about the successes of that. I've been working with government sector agencies to link their strategic priorities with flexible working. So what is it that those leaders were already hoping to achieve through the business, and how can flexible working actually maintain or improve those outcomes? So definitely you can do that. At a team level, like Bree said, it's actually about identifying what needs to get done and then designing around that so that we can unlock flexibility. We can unlock that 1 day a week. There are good examples to show that it is possible, but as employees and managers, we need to talk our leaders through the steps of how we will make that work. Trial it for 3 months so that they feel less like it's something set in stone. Put in place some good evaluation and monitoring procedures so that over time we can monitor how effective it is. But I can tell you my experience is that over time it will work, and you will shift that mindset of your leaders just by making it work and continuing the conversation and, putting in place those checks and balances, those rules of the road that everyone takes responsibility for, and takes responsibility for making it work, because if it fails, then it fails for everyone.
Look, there's some great questions coming in, and I want to use the "we'll be flexible" approach here, just to let you know that we will stay on a little bit longer than the hard stop hour in 3 minutes. So what I'm going to propose to do is going to just throw you some resources that we can suggest people might want to look at. Also, I know that Manisha has to sort of step out, but we are all happy to answer questions and keep this conversation going. So it's not an endpoint. We will pass on the decks and some of these links, and if people want to get in touch, please do get in touch, because I think this is really, we're just getting some really interesting topics. One thing that we're at Engage Squared we have is we have a kit, a working from anywhere kit, which sort of is beautifully designed and quite fun. So that's something to I think that takes on quite a lot of the topics that we talked about here. I know that Troy has naturally from Microsoft have a heap of resources, and he's included a few links here, which you might want to talk to quickly, Troy.
Yeah, sure. I've just thrown in the link to the hybrid learning paper, which I mentioned earlier, so that's available to be downloaded. The other one that I've thrown up here is this is our special education accessibility resources. It says for remote learning, but please don't be put off by that if your state is back at school. It's a great one-stop page for everything in terms of Microsoft accessibility resources. I can't stress how great this page is. We've once you jump in, there's stuff for teachers, for school leaders, for students, for parents, etc. So yeah, please have a look at that. Another thing that I want to announce, which is just brand new, It's what's called our Inclusive Classroom Parent Information Kit. It looks like the link has actually dropped off that, so I'll throw that in the chat as well. But what it is it's a resource kit for schools to present to parents. So the idea is so that parents aren't having to go home and, what the heck is this and how do I use this? There's, as you can see, there are detailed instructions and scripts. There's a PowerPoint deck, videos, handouts, a whole heap of stuff. So what we wanted to do was build the capacity of schools to actually present to parents so that students are able to use these resources at home. So I'll make sure I throw that link in the chat.
That's great, Troy, thanks. Just might switch back to Kat. We've got a question from John Barrett at Microsoft. Of those, really about, you've obviously done things at scale, and that's going to be, scale is a big question about all these programs. Of your 31 pilots, what did you see was the most successful?
Yeah, I read that question. It made me laugh because it's just been so delightful for us to see the results from all the pilots. They were a mix of frontline and office-based roles. And I can't really say that one was more successful than the other, because actually they all achieved what we hoped that they would achieve. And there is an evaluation report on the website. I've put the link in the chat that you can actually have a look at the results of that down to the actual individual pilots. But I did want to call out one that has been particularly delightful for me, which is after the initial round, which is what the evaluation report's about, we then started working with other teams. And one of those teams was the child protection and out-of-home care workers within FACS. It's now DCJ. So these teams, work with very vulnerable children up in the Maitland and Charleston region up near Newcastle. And just by offering those teams flexibility, even through COVID, the child protection workers were able to reach, for the first time ever, they reached 100% of their child visit targets through having flexibility. So, and the stories that we've heard of, home visits actually being done over FaceTime or, other technology, so that a child who, was the person that the workers had to access could use the iPhone and actually walk the worker around the house in a way that was really non-intrusive. Because if you think about the power dynamic of that, having a social worker force their way, or not force, but mandatory visits into someone's home is a bit of an invasion in some ways. It has to be done for the welfare of that child. But actually, to be able to achieve the same result, which is to check in on the child and check that their home environment is safe, but without being intrusive and without stepping on the power or the choice of the parent, has been hugely powerful. So that is one story with frontline roles where those pilots have made a huge difference. And now DCJ are really rolling out flexible working across the board as a result. So we're hugely, hugely proud of that work.
That's great, Kat, and thanks for the question, John Barrett. Now we have gone a bit over time, so I do want to do a bit of a wrap up. I want to give everyone a chance to just give us the last any last tips or insights that you have for the audience, and I want to thank you all for participating, and most important, those people that are listening to the webinar. Thanks for your interaction. Do keep in touch. We will do more along these lines, both at Engage Squared and Synergy. So Brigida, maybe you can kick us off. Have you got anything closing thoughts that you want to finish with?
Yeah, definitely. Just two things. So for my team particularly, I've learnt a few things, and one of them is, setting up a social contract that we're doing here in our wider D&T team, so that there's a shared understanding of how we will work in this environment. Things like understanding that you need to share calendars, or that you're going to stick to the agenda, or make sure there's an agenda in your meeting invites, and things like that, so people are managing that better. And then from a wider perspective in the UX world, when you're doing interviews, sharing the instructions before the call if you can, giving people time to set up maybe a practice session, being flexible when things don't work. We had a user research session where nothing worked on the computer, and we did it by phone. So it's just giving people that time and that flexibility to get that in space, and that will make people more comfortable. And also, as I said, around using new tools, set up a time to just explore and practice with it, if you can, with your clients, so that they can just get used to the tools before you actually run the workshop.
Thanks, Bree, and thanks for helping organise this.
Great,
Kat,
thank you.
Kat, thank you for sharing your details of your pilot and the great work you've been doing the last couple of years. Have you got anything, suggestions for us?
Yeah, I guess any of our leaders on the call, I'd like to encourage them not to take a binary approach. It's not either the office or home without any other options. We'd really like to see some creativity in the solutions. So, fostering hubs, or even the office or the workspace as a place where cross-pollination can happen between people and between teams and with clients. So seeing the office as a resource for those teams, for collaboration, for socializing, for that innovation, for team building. Everyone's been saying to us that they miss those water cooler conversations and the opportunities, for career development or networking. But I want to say that those interactions were actually ad hoc. They were open to bias. It was just who you wanted to talk to. Whereas I think leaders can really design an intentional way forward to replace those water cooler conversations, which would likely be more inclusive. We really want to see decentralized hubs so that people can go to work closer to where they live. It allows for those shorter commutes, the lower costs, and hopefully that improved collaboration in those third spaces. So yeah, I just want to encourage people to think hugely creatively and to really access every level of their organization to come up with those solutions.
Thanks, Kat. You're awesome. Really appreciate it. And Troy, anything from you? Thank you for taking time for doing this during Ignite. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem at all. I would like to leave, I've just put a link again into the Q&A, which is a link directly to Microsoft Accessibility Australia. This is the landing page, because, it's great that I can get up here and talk about all this stuff, but people need to know how to find out for themselves. So I just want to encourage you to visit that webpage. There's webinars, there's walkthroughs, there's a whole heap of information for people to find out. And find out what works for them and what works for other people in their lives. But we have what's called the Accessibility Fundamentals Badge, which is actually a certification that Microsoft has got, which is free to participate in, free to to claim that certification as well. So that's actually on that web page as well. So I just encourage people to explore that. It goes beyond technology. We do a little bit of accessibility in terms of theory, as well as the exploration of that in technology. So thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Troy. That's really really great, and good luck for the rest of the week and the rest of the school year. My goodness, and good luck with all those in Melbourne for as we sort of de-thaw with some of the restrictions there. So I hope you have some good rest of the year. Finally, I just want to thank the team, both at Synergy and Bree's team, the behind the scenes. Amazing technology and Teams that we're using. Teams Live today. It does. There's a little bit of behind the scenes that's gone on. So thank you for the Synergy Group and the work your team's done, Bree, and also finally for Miriam, Mel, and Lauren. Really appreciate you producing this behind the scenes, bringing things onto the screen, and it's been a great webinar. Look forward to the next one, and I think we better have go and have a water cooler moment and go and have lunch as we're in Sydney. So thanks all for joining, and good luck with all your plans for being flexible and doing interesting things with your teams working remotely in the future. Bye for now.